Okay, so we're back learning to code. We've been focused a lot on web technologies, specifically for these last several sessions. That means doing HTML, doing CSS, and recently for the past 2 sessions now, and this will be the last session where we do that. We've been working on our own HTML page, our own HTML document with some CSS stylings that we've been modifying and been kind of working along with all of you to do this. And I wanted to take the opportunity to introduce some tools, or to reintroduce some of the tools that I'm using, just mainly because I think it's a good refresher to kind of like remember remember some of the kind of software that you have available to you, and then also to remember like what all you need essentially to get going. So I actually made some local changes to my files just so we can get a good baseline for some of the stuff we learned with, oh wow, hold on, my cat is doing something. Oops, sorry about that. All right, sorry about that. So I'm gonna share my screen and just make sure, yeah, okay. Okay, so you should be able to see pretty much everything on my screen right now. And what I'm looking at, what I have open right now is a text editor. So this text editor we were using last time, but in case I brushed over it, this is a Sublime text editor. I used it because it's free. It's accessible to everyone just by downloading it online. And we can go ahead and check out the editors. If we go to Sublime Text Editor, and you can see I've already been there before, but if you just go to sublimetext.com, you can actually download this. There's a version for Windows as well. And it's a free editor, and that's what I use to write code. I've been using to write code for these sessions. The other tool that I'm using, which I'm actually going to reintroduce here as well, is a site called GitHub. GitHub is where I host my code. So I currently have these projects here. And you can see that I'm actually signed in here. And so I'm able to see a lot of this code that I've been posting. We made some updates recently. And I noted that these should actually be revised and cleaned so that you could use them to practice or to learn. So what I want to do is actually show this tool that I'm using here to like store and maintain my code that you see on this screen with some of the changes that I made. So I actually made some changes to kind of simplify the CSS that we talked about last time. So we have some selectors. We have a span selector, which is selecting every span element here. And then we have, so here's a span, here's a span. And then we have a particular ID selector, which is selecting an element by ID specifically. And we don't have that ID present immediately, but we can go ahead and add it really quick, just so it's a little more obvious. I'll add it to this one. So I'm just adding an attribute because I have this rule that says that any span with this ID should be colored red. So I'm just going to add a quick span that will show up as red. That way we'll see it on our page. And I'll add another one actually because I have a generic rule for spans that I also want to show up, that I want to have show up. First item, let's say that. Okay, so we have some CSS on the page. I cleaned some of it up so that it wasn't all over the place and conflicting. We have some rules. So basically a bunch of changes since we last met that I'd done before. And now what I want to show is how we can use GitHub to actually save these changes, or what's called commit them. So that we can keep track of our progress and save the state of our files. So everything that I'm doing, I made in this tutorial folder. I have some videos further back, if you look on the library YouTube, going a little more in depth about this, but I just want to show that like I'm using github.com for this. They have some good tutorials as well. If you just go to like the main website, where you can read about like how to set one up at GitHub, but it's very simple. You basically create an account, you log in, and then it'll even ask you if you want to create a repository, which is something like this. And you can get started that way. But I just want to show that. So I have these same files on my computer right here. So styles.css and new home.html. And these files are like uploaded on this website as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my tool here, which I'm using a command line version of the Git tool. But you don't have to use a command line version if this looks like daunting. They actually make something called Git for Mac. There's also Git for Windows if you use Windows. So you can go here. And then there's this like installer. If you go to GUI clients like this, and then you can select your operating system. So there's GitHub Desktop, which obviously integrates with GitHub itself. I've used SourceTree before. It works really well. These are, there's a ton of them, as you can see. And then on Windows, there's a bunch of them as well. Again, SourceTree is a really common one. I've used that before. And it just lets you like not have to do something like this. But again, these are all free. They don't cost any money to use them. So I'm going to go ahead and review my changes. So I made a bunch of changes here. I'm just reviewing them to make sure that I'm okay with them. And then I'm going to go ahead and make a message summarizing the changes. So cleaning up some styles and removing some conflicting styles. And that can be my message. And then I'm going to basically save my changes so that they're permanent. And if I go here, it updates to reflect those changes. So I'm not exactly trying to give you a tutorial on like how GitHub works, because it isn't so bad. You just have to learn like how they have their website set up. It's not super important, but I just want to show what I'm doing, I guess, to be transparent. So now we've updated our code, so we're at a starting point again that we can work from to introduce some new stuff. So now that we're caught up here, if you want, you can go to this website. This is available to everyone. It's a public website. And if I go to chat here, I can send a link. So in case you want to go visit it yourself, if you want to get the updated code, which is now updated, and you'll just go to this tutorial folder, and these are the two files that you need. The quickest way to do that, I think we mentioned this last time, is like you can click raw here, I think is it? Yeah. If you click raw and you just click like Control S, or if you're on a Mac, Command S, and you can save as, and that'll let you just save the file as like an HTML file. Or an even easier way might be, right, you can just click this and just drag and copy it. That could be another way. But okay, so I'm going to move on, but just to show, I'm just using Git as a tool to save my code and maintain it, and I'm using Sublime Text to edit it. And then I'm using Firefox as my browser, which is also free, but Chrome works. Any of these things work fine. So let me look at my notes really quick. Okay, so yeah. So one thing I wanted to introduce this week as kind of a send-off, just wanted to introduce some final sort of HTML elements. We definitely covered a lot last week in terms of like how you can style and like design on a page, and we also covered some of like the pitfalls using CSS and using classes, classes like these to kind of decorate elements in your page. So with the code we have so far, what we can do is we can visit this folder, and I'll go ahead and take us there now. I have the code that we're modifying here stored here, and I think we also saw last week that you can just go ahead and drag this file to your browser, and it will load the page very conveniently for us. You can do this on any operating system, Windows too, but you can also navigate there using this syntax, file, and then the colon, and then hyphen, or I'm sorry, slash, slash, slash. You can just kind of do it this way. So either way works. Okay. Yeah, so we're going to start by adding a couple of new elements here. One thing that I want to introduce that wasn't in here was a tool or an element that will help us kind of separate some of our page content. So right now we have some spans and we have some paragraphs. Last time we talked about how paragraphs are what's called like a block level element. So it means that whenever you use a paragraph, it's going to break the page and bring you down to the next line. So we see that inside here, anything in here is going to start out on a new block. And then once it ends with this tag here, and we start a new one, that next paragraph will also start on a new block, and so on. Okay, so you could style these paragraphs, for example, in a way that brings this content closer together. We could remove some of the space here. One of the ways that we could do that is by adding a margin, a bottom margin using CSS here. So let's use our external style sheet. We can kind of do that. So we can say P, which is going to refer to all paragraphs, right? Any paragraph element. And we'll say that the margin, the top margin, which is basically this space outside of the content. So if I were to inspect this and just grab this paragraph element here, whoops. If I were to just grab this particular paragraph here that you're seeing, the space outside of this, and in fact, like above this box, kind of hard to see, I know, because we've got a bunch of paragraphs going on, but the white space sort of above this blue box that's appearing when I select this paragraph specifically, I wish I could, I guess I can kind of get it this way, maybe. But this one that says this is also some text. So the space in yellow there, that's like our margin. And we can affect that space using CSS to kind of like separate some of the content a little bit more clearly. But if we wanted to add sort of like elements that kind of are, that serve this purpose for us to like separate paragraphs, we can do so with what's called a header element or a heading element. And these are part of the HTML standard, usually used for paragraphs or block content that you want to separate out. So we can add one now. There's 6 different types of headers, all 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. I don't think there's a 7. Yeah, there's not. So we can use either of these, and basically they just get bigger in size. So header elements are also block level, just like the paragraph, except they're limited to like, they're limited in kind of like the way that they can be represented in terms of the content that you put in. I mean, you can style them however you want, but they're going to have like some implicit style, which we'll see in a second. So let's go ahead and add a header. In fact, let's go ahead and add it at the top of the page. And let's actually add it maybe even to above the span, but we'll replace the span content with a header. So we'll take this out. So we can get rid of this. And we'll take this one out and we'll replace it with a header. So we'll cut that and then I'll put it here. You notice my editor is kind of doing this like auto formatting for me because it knows I'm working with HTML. And if you use Sublime text, that's going to happen. So see how it's like underlining this H1 because it's noticed that it's like a pair, an opening tag and a closing tag. And then if I press enter, it knows to move this below my cursor so that I have some space to add content. I don't have anything special set up. This is just like what the editor does for me. And it's also kind of indenting content below automatically the parent element. So this body is a parent element. If I add content below it, it's going to auto indent. Again, that's just like a feature of the editor. It's helping you organize your thoughts as you work. So I'm going to remove this span now, and now we're just left with this header. Some people like to put headers all on one line, since that's how they kind of look on the page. But I'll kind of leave it similarly to how I have other elements. And then we'll refresh. And so now we have this big header. There's a couple things you notice compared with like paragraph text and with span text. So with spans, we're getting like the default font size. We're getting the default font like weight. But this is bolded and it's very big. This is, again, kind of a carryover from like the old way of working with HTML. So the old way of building HTML, like web documents, was HTML was kind of used for everything. And now that's no longer the case, but they kept the header behavior. So the way that the header works, where it's like bold and the text is larger, depending on the header that you use, that's kind of like a carryover. We can try a header 3. We'll keep this one. And usually headers should refer to like the text below. So let's keep in that fashion, and we'll say that we can say paragraph 1. And then say this is the first paragraph, just to make it clear like the headers for this particular paragraph. And then we can add actually another header. And we'll do a different one. We'll use an H2 or maybe an H3 just to show that they give you different effects. And I need to remember to add a closing tag. Another thing my editor will do is automatically supply the proper closing tag based on like which tag is still opened up most recently. So that's kind of a useful thing. We'll say paragraph 2 here. Keep the same format, and then we'll just add some more text here. And we'll go ahead and refresh with our changes. So we made a bunch of changes, right? And so let's go ahead and test them. So now we have the change to header 1, the content here. And then we've added header 2 for the next paragraph. So you see two things that the header is kind of useful for. One, it's like separating content, but it's kind of this composite element where it also makes certain pieces of content clear or obvious. So this paragraph 2 is making the fact that we have multiple paragraphs like more clear. It's also a different size from this first header. So often what people use header ones for, or H1s. And by the way, you know, this, you can see examples of this kind of thing everywhere. They might be using header. Some places they don't want to use them. So in this case, this is actually a logo. Let's see if maybe this is a header. They used a span, which we're also familiar with now. Let's see maybe if this one is, yeah, so here's a header actually. So they used H3s. So, you know, you see they're doing the same thing, right? They're like separating content out, and then they have paragraphs just like we do below their header content. So this is a super common framework for like organizing content on a web page, and we're kind of imparting meaning on our content separately from like what the actual content is. You know, this doesn't have to say paragraph 1 for this to be a paragraph element, right? It could say like kazoo or something. Like it doesn't matter. Just a reminder that the content is separate from the HTML itself. It doesn't affect the way that the HTML shows up on the page. And most people use like header 1, H1 as, oh, by the way, I'm gonna zoom in. Can everyone see my screen okay? I can actually zoom in if it's like
yeah, I think, I mean, I see it very well.
Okay.
Oh, I like it like that.
Oh, that's better? Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Paige, I'm sorry, I'm gonna kind of like make you go back to something, but
No, that's fine.
how we so I click on the link that you sent, and then if I want to see the test page as a like this, like not the code but the actual test page, where I had to click, I need to download all the stuff first in order to see it, or can I click?
Yeah. So, oh no, you don't have to download anything as long as you have a browser. Yeah, you should be able to do this. Let me go ahead and demonstrate that really quick. Okay. Hopefully you have a text editor pulled up, but if not, you can go ahead and pull that up. So you will need, but you can use any text editor. So are you on like Windows, for example?
Yeah, I'm in Windows and I'm using Chrome.
Okay, cool. So on Windows, if you don't have Sublime Text installed, what you could use is a Notepad. Okay. I won't have it here because I'm not on Windows, but I have something called a text edit that just comes with. Okay. Yeah, but so just imagine I'm using Notepad in this case. But if you were able to find that, then what you can do is, what I'd do is I'd click raw here. So if you found this page.
Yes.
Right, then you can click, well, maybe you can just download this folder. You might be able to. No, that's okay. All right, anyway. That's all right if you can't download just the folder. We can do a file at a time. So I wish we could, though. That would be convenient. But so I'm going to click this file and then click raw. Mm-hmm. And what raw lets you do is, first of all, you could just copy it like this. So I'm just pressing like Control A and then Control C, like, and then I can paste it like that. So that's one way to do it. The other way, you can do save page as. You can do this in any browser. Yes. And then you just say .html, make sure you say that. Or Windows might already assume it's an HTML file for you. And then if you click save, yeah, I actually already did this once, so I'll just go ahead and replace it. That's okay. And then if we click it, let me go to my downloads. And then if I actually click this, it will open in the browser. Oh, okay. Yeah. All right. Okay, perfect. I'm sorry I make you go back to this. Oh, no, that's all right. Yeah, that's okay. I was trying to figure it out and I was like, that's so easy. I mean, it's like, makes sense. Okay. No, yeah, that's all right. I mean, it's nice to like be able to do it very quickly. So, yeah. In the case of the CSS, I will need to download also the other file and have it all together in one folder to be able to see the styles. Yes, and actually you bring up a really cool point, which I didn't even thing to address.
Also, like if we have pictures on it or things like that, everything should be downloaded and be on the same folder.
Yes, that's correct.
Right.
Yes, you have it right. Yeah, you'll need all assets. So right now we don't have any like images or anything, but we're actually hopefully in the next 30 minutes, we're going to try and add an image to our page, which will be
perfect. Okay,
fun.
makes sense.
But yeah, so we'll need to collect those assets, but also do you notice something not just about, or if anyone wants to chime in, feel free. But do you notice anything about, so I'm going to go ahead and drag this over.
Yeah, well, we're missing the styles that we just created on the new CSS.
We are missing styles, that's correct.
Yeah.
But, well, yes. So yeah, we're definitely missing the styles that we made very recently, right? Like we're missing this stuff because I didn't upload it. And
then the changes that you made also are not, I think, saved.
Yes, the changes, I haven't pushed them out yet. I haven't saved them. Okay. But, and then we're missing a file. We're missing the CSS file.
Okay.
Because, right, I didn't download that into my downloads folder. So this is pointing to a different place. It's pointing to the file that you just saw me download, right? But I wanted to point something out that's interesting. The page still loaded, if you notice. This is, maybe useful knowledge, depending. But essentially, what I wanted to point out is that it will still load your page if you're missing an external style sheet. It's not, the page won't fall apart or anything like that. So that's something to keep in mind. That's like kind of different from typical like compiled languages or like full programming languages compared to something like HTML and CSS. If something is broken, like if you wrote some HTML poorly, like if you maybe, for instance, what if I mess up this H1 tag? It's still going to load the page. It'll load it. In some cases, it'll also just like work. In this case, it kind of did work. But finally, when I remove this closing tag, the page is still going to load, right? But it's just going to totally not know how to handle my H1 here. So
exactly, yeah.
Yes, so that's something to keep in mind. Like if you're ever experiencing problems, or like in this case, right? The difference here is that this span is no longer red, and that's because it's missing this file, which included the color red here, and then the span is also not underlined, like we did last time as well. So keep that in mind. It's just something to, and then obviously it does give me a notification, which is nice. So Firefox is telling me like, hey, I couldn't find the style sheet that we specified here with this link tag, which we introduced last time. So that's something good to keep in mind. So we did get something new out of that. It's a good information. Okay.
Thank you, Paige.
Yeah, no problem. All right, so I think I was getting at basically saying that H1s are often used to head pages. So like to put the content like title at the top of the page. You might use an H1 to just kind of present like what your page is. So if we want to go back to using actually like useful content, I'll say this is a web tutorial. So that's why we might use H1s for, like semantically, like meaning wise. And then we would use H2s or H3s like the Sublime website did, right? They used, actually here's an H2, right? So they used H2 for this like subsection. And then they're using H3s as like subsections. So we can kind of do something similar. We can maybe have an H2 that's like example paragraphs. Okay, and then we can refresh this. And then what we can do is do another subsection here using H3s, and just remember that the headings get progressively smaller as the suffix here increases. So, and there are 6 total available to you. You can read about them here, by the way. So here we go. So just in case you're interested. And then we'll say, we'll change our paragraph specific headers to be H3s. And just keep in mind, me doing these spaces is not doing anything to the page itself. So I could keep all these clustered together and it would make no difference. The actual content organization, the way it's shown, is all browser dependent. So the browser is going to choose the way that these elements show up on the page when it's rendered. So I'll keep in the same fashion, right? And let's just go ahead and load this and test it. So we have this larger heading here, H1, which is noticeably, a bit bigger compared to this one, right? You'll also notice that the space between the elements is getting progressively smaller. So here, the space is like a little bit different. This distance here, we can test that to show that that's the case. So here, whenever you look at computed or layout, you can actually see margins very clearly. So if I hop over and I click this, in Chrome, it should be something similar. I don't actually remember. Maybe if someone has Chrome up and they're following along, they can tell us what the tab is in Chrome if they were able to find it. But in Firefox, it's called Layout. And so it just gives me basically the element and all of the computed dimensions of the element as it shows up on the page. And so we can see here there's a margin. This is like the default margin for a header 3. You notice that as we go up in header types, the margin increases, right? So this one's 16.38. You don't have to like know that number offhand or anything like that. It's just notable that the margin is getting smaller with these different headers, with these smaller headers.
In Chrome, it's called styles, I think.
Oh, thanks. Okay, great, perfect. Yeah, so if you navigate to the tab, and to get to that sub-tab, you still click the element in the inspector, right?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, cool, thank you. Yeah, so this is really useful tool in general for anything, any kind of CSS that's modifying the dimensions of an element. So it's very, very useful. Okay, so let's go ahead, now that we know like this works essentially, right? We tested it, we see the smaller subheading. Let's actually, I want to use an even smaller one because I kind of have trouble distinguishing these two in particular as being like meaningful. So I'm going to go ahead and change mine to an H4. And I'm going to go ahead and do that in all of the places where I want it before we reload the page. And we have one last paragraph. And I need to change the content of this one above to say 2 and 3. Because we have these H4s above each paragraph. Remember this spacing here between, it doesn't do anything as far as like how the page is going to render. It's not going to make any change. So I'm going to reload this, and you can now see that we have these nice subheadings. And hopefully this is pretty clear to everyone, like that this is nicer to read than just having these like sort of unbroken pieces of text. It's more accessible. It's just easier to understand what's going on. You know, we have these clear sections that we can sort of like parse mentally in a pretty simple way. So that's why they're there. That's why you should use them. And you can see even sort of contemporary websites that look really sleek and clean, they're using them too. So yeah, hopefully this is clear. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is, oh yeah. So we're already familiar with hyperlinks. We added one here earlier. This link was to an external resource. We can click it. It takes us to this page about HTML basics. I'm going to close this inspector. So what if we want to kind of, now that we have these content boundaries, what if we wanted to like sort of link between these content boundaries? And then also, what if we wanted to link to our own content across some other pages? Like within our own like file structure. So if we remember, this is basically a folder, right? And then these are HTML files within that folder. So this is like an index that we can like navigate using links. So I'm going to show a way not only to link to like external websites using URLs, but I'll also show how we can jump around on a page, but also to other pages that we want to set up. So what I think I'm going to do is use these headers as a way to kind of like link to other pieces, or as a way to be linked to, so we can like essentially jump to these headers, right? Because these are like sections of our content. We might want to like jump to them using like kind of like a table of contents at the top. For reference, for what I'm talking about, Wikipedia does this really well. So I don't know, I was reading about this old horror movie in the 70s. I think this page doesn't do it, but there's a couple of pages that do. Maybe we can learn about. Okay, so here's one that does it. So we have to show it. So if we click this contents section, right, they have these headers, these H elements. Okay, so they're using H2s. Okay, and what I want to do is if I click demographics here, it's going to scroll down immediately to this next section. So we can do that actually with links. And it's a combination of basically identifying these headers and then linking to them using their identification. So let's try that out. First things first, we're gonna like make basically this table of contents. Let's put it under web tutorial, just because I think that's kind of a sensible place for it. That way we can like jump around. So I'm gonna make what's called an unordered list. Or actually, we can make an ordered list and we can have it be numbered. So that's an OL tag. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to populate it with list items like this. And now that I have one, I'm just going to copy paste. And I'm going to make a bunch of them. So I'm going to copy paste that too. And now I have 4 of them. So we're going to add links here, just like they've done on Wikipedia. Whoops, I didn't want to do that. We're going to add links, just like they've done on Wikipedia, here to ours, so that we can link to these sections of our page. So the way that we'll do that is we're going to add this same anchor tag, but we're going to build the link a little bit differently. So instead of adding, and see, even the editor gets kind of confused, right? It's not going to automatically know exactly the way I want to organize my content in my HTML file, because it's not always perfect, right? It's just guessing. So this is just totally arbitrary. You can do it however you want. I like to indent the children of their parents. just because that makes it clear for me. And I like to indent the content as well of the element. But sometimes if it's an inline element or like a flow element, like a link is, right? So if I have a link, it's not going to add a page break. And we can demonstrate that actually really quickly. First, let's just reload this. Whoops, I have to save it. So I saved it. I'm gonna reload it. So our list is a little wonky right now, as you can see. This is because the way this style works, text align center. What it's doing is it's obviously aligning text to the center of the page. But for these list items, there's no text. So it actually doesn't align them. Kind of a weird caveat of sort of these older elements, these lists. I would encourage you to kind of play with styling these sorts of elements, like these lists. There's certain things that you can do to make them sort of behave a little bit better. But in any event, you know, we're not really concerned about that. We're just trying to build these links. So maybe what we'll do is, well, let's go ahead and first demonstrate that the link tag is like an inline flow element. So what we can do here is we can show, like for this link that we made, I can actually just add content following the link. So additional content after link. And hopefully you'll see that, yeah, it just adds it right after. It doesn't like add a new line, right? Like whereas if we added a paragraph, it's going to start a new piece of, like a new block. I typically, for elements like this, will add the text like this, sometimes just to mentally like remind myself of that fact, because I kind of do want my HTML code to mimic, in a way, what's going on in the browser, like when the page gets loaded. But it's not super important. So again, just a reminder, like to separate the HTML you're writing and then the way that you expect it to load. So for our link text, let's go ahead and actually just copy these all the way down. So this, and then we're going to go ahead and make the href blank. Actually, I don't think I've introduced a blank href attribute. Does anyone want to guess what happens with a blank href? So meaning like we don't have a link.
Does it just go to itself or like the page that we're already at?
That's a good guess. Yeah, let's find out. Okay, so we'll reload it. So now our list is like in proper order and stuff like that. So let's click the empty link. So do you see maybe what happened?
It's like doesn't go anywhere.
You're both correct. Yes, we didn't go anywhere, and it also refreshed. So you'll see that a lot, actually, for certain cases. So for example here, this page actually does it a little bit differently. What they're doing is they have a link to themselves. So they actually put a link to like the page again, which you can also do. We could say new home. We could do it that way. And it'll do the same thing. It'll reload the page. The other way we can actually do this is using this special keyword here, hash. Whoops, oh wait, I think I did it wrong. Or maybe it's just blank. Tag. Sometimes I also forget. I thought it was a hash, but I could be wrong. Oh, and then you just saw the thing that we're going to do. I get, oh yeah, here's what I'm looking for. Okay. Well, maybe it's like that or something, or that. I remember something with a hash, but oh, well, that does that. That's probably bad. You don't really want to do that. So maybe just ignore me and just remember the blank. I don't remember what I'm thinking of, but yeah, not super important. The important thing is just that, yeah, if you leave it blank, it'll not only will it link to the page that you are on currently, but it'll actually reload the page. So I've definitely seen people use that as like a hack for like reloading the page. I mean, you know, interesting way of doing it. Okay, so let's go ahead and try to now link to some content. We actually saw it here in this documentation for how to do it. So where I'm at currently is just, I just searched the anchor element documentation on MDN. And then they actually had a section for how to link, like linking to certain sections of a document. So that's what I wanted to check out. So maybe we can just search section on here. Yes, okay, cool. So check this out. Maybe that's what I was thinking of, this hash. So what we're gonna do is essentially use IDs, which you might recognize from our style sheet, where we've made an ID specific selector for a certain span to color it red. We're gonna use IDs in a similar manner to actually link to content on the page, to specific sections. So let's go ahead and do that now. So let's go ahead and give like actual real meaning to our links. So we can link to paragraph 1. Similarly, we can jump to paragraph 2. Oh, and actually what we can do, let's do a nested list, because we actually have this subsection of example paragraphs. So the way we do that is we'll do paragraph 1 second, and then follow up with paragraph 2, 3, etc. But I'll show you a way to do essentially a sublist so that you can show that this content is like within the example paragraph section. So first, let's just make sure that that works. That looks correct. Okay, so that looks good, right? We now have all of our paragraphs written out. And then what I wanted to show here is that we can actually just basically create a list within a list. And our browser knows how to like handle that situation. And it knows how to render it in a way that like is meaningful for us. So I can just add the, oh, and see the editor, right, didn't really know what to do, like indentation wise, which is kind of annoying. That'll happen sometimes, but you know, nothing really you can do about it. So I think you can actually write some custom rules to kind of make that better. But in any event, it's not too big a deal. So if you see this, what it did is it actually made this a sublist. It doesn't look great. We can fix this in style with styling. But for now, I'm going to kind of leave it alone because I'm okay with the way it looks. Though I'm actually going to make it maybe an unordered list so that these numbers don't look so weird. So maybe this looks a little better, I think. But the point is that it's showing that these paragraphs are within this example paragraph section. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to build the IDs so that we can reference them with our links. So what I'm going to do down here is I'm going to go to each of our headers, and I'm going to give them an ID, just like we did this span here, this one. In fact, we can just like copy it and use it as like our template. So in this case, I'm going to call it, I'm going to say example paragraph header. I like to use kebab case, like that's these dashes for classes and for IDs. You can do whatever you want. And just remember the syntax for this kind of reference is a hashtag like this, and then the actual ID. So let's test it. Click it. It worked, but our page is very tiny. It doesn't actually scroll. It'll scroll if we zoom in. So it's more suitable for like longer pages, obviously, where you have some content that you would want to scroll down to. For instance, I assume LeBron probably has a very big Wikipedia page. It looks like he does. He has a lot of content. So, you know, it's going to scroll us, and we can read about all these different subsections. Cool. So I know we're running out of time. I really do want this to kind of be the last word on very basic HTML, because I think you have enough information now. You know about MDN. You know about text editors. You know how to build HTML files. You know the basic syntax. At this point now, it's a matter of just learning about new elements. MDN has a really great element reference. You could really, if you wanted to, just scroll through all these different elements and just learn about them. But one thing I like to do is I kind of like search for them I try to be thoughtful about the way I do it. For instance, like embed an image HTML. And you know, usually this will get you pretty far. You can even tack on MDN, and that might even get you exactly where you need to be, right? So it looks like we got there. This way you get a nice documentation page on how to do it. But you know, any of these sites looks like they're going to tell you basically what you need to know. So if anyone needs to go, you know, that's totally fine. If you have any last minute questions you want me to address before you do go, so that you don't have any like lingering thoughts. But otherwise, I'm going to try to show you really quickly how to link to another page, another document in your folder, because I think that's also very important. Does anyone have any like quick questions before we kind of reach time?
For something like Wikipedia, I imagine like if someone was working on this page, I mean, I suppose they could create their own ID for that content that you want to link to. Mm-hmm. But I just imagine, are there ways that you could design something that generates those IDs for you?
Yes, yes, okay. Absolutely.
I don't know if that's within the scope of anything we're going to learn anytime soon, but I was just curious how that.
Sure. Yeah.
That exists.
Yeah. The way that I think a lot of people get this kind of thing done is using something like a front end framework, which in this class we talked about a couple of times, like mentioned things like Angular, Vue. They let you add what are called like dynamic attributes to elements. So imagine essentially I have my HTML page here, and then I made a network call on loading the page to like get the data for the page, similar to like what Wikipedia is doing here with their information on like LeBron, like they're loading this information from like a server or whatever. What I could do is basically store all of this data in like a special type of like file. And then when I load the data, what I could do is dynamically build these list items with an ID, or sorry, not the list items, but the headers. Mm-hmm. Well, the list items too, but yeah. And I'd have an ID that looks something like, you know, list item X or whatever, essentially allowing me to write code that supports this HTML to fill in IDs dynamically.
Okay. So
Yeah.
because it's like a header or something, maybe it'll proc it to create this ID.
Yeah, I
like
would.
that.
Yeah, I would load. I would load resources in my header. Or is that the header you were referring to?
Like the H. No.
Oh,
like the
okay. I see.
H4, like, yeah. Anything with that tag having a link or an ID, I guess.
Sure. Yeah.
Sense. Yeah.
Yeah. It's yeah. I think typically the way it's done is more like Let me show you actually really quickly. Just an example from one front-end framework called Vue. So we haven't talked about JavaScript in this course yet, but you know, we can kind of imagine essentially that JavaScript is going to run adjacent with our page. It's going to get loaded adjacent with our page, just like CSS does. So you can think of it this way. What this is actually a piece of data that's inside of a Java, like some JavaScript code that's like built this data object, MSG, message. And what we're doing here is we've created a span with what's called a binding. So this is a data binding. And what it's doing is saying, like, if you find a variable in JavaScript, like in a JavaScript file that you've loaded with me, like this page, go access the content, the value, and actually replace this block with that content. So what that lets you do is actually build JavaScript code with functions and methods that essentially you can then populate these data bindings conditionally even. Like in this case, this is a conditional data binding. It's checking for a piece of data called greeting in some JavaScript to see whether it should actually display this element. So we could have something like if, you know, if there is some, like, there are list items, maybe we could have a piece of data in our JavaScript that tells us whether there are list items, and then this would only display if there were list items. So similarly, what we could have is something like ID equals, and then we could have a data binding that's like list item X. Okay, and then what we could do with that is we could actually it would populate the ID here based on the value of that piece of data. So that's something that's.
What is this concept called one more time? Like concept of populating something like this?
Sure. Yeah. In most cases, it's going to be called data binding.
Data binding.
Yeah, data binding. It's pretty common. Yeah. It's definitely like any sort of full-fledged front-end framework like Vue is going to have the ability to do that in this templated way. You can do it in what's called like just, you know, in just standard HTML. We can do these kinds of things like data binding in a way, but it's a little bit more difficult. It's a little bit more cumbersome in some ways. So these front-end frameworks try to address that with this syntax. So this is not something that you can just do without using this library. And this library we would just load as a group of JavaScript files just like up here. So we would just say like script. In fact, I can literally load that right now. I can say source. I can like go load Vue on this page. And I think we can just say, yeah, the CDN here. So this is basically like a way to link Vue. This is like the library all. This is horrible to show someone that doesn't know what JavaScript is, but is basically just like a small, tiny version of this library. And we can actually just load it on our page. So I'll do this. So it doesn't really look like anything happened, but if we go here now to maybe debugger, we can see it. So this is it. So we now have like a view. We have like all of view. And we would have to do a couple of other things to get this working on our particular page. We'd have to start what's called a view app. We'd have to make one using JavaScript again. And the rest of everything else would be done using our JavaScript. But once I have this library loaded like this very, very long script that adds a bunch of things to our page, I can then start to use stuff like this, these data bindings. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Okay, I know we're pretty well over time, but I just want to quickly show, I'll just do it very fast, just to kind of expose you to linking to another page. So let's go down and we'll add it at the bottom. Kind of silly, but we're going to add an A tag. And I didn't finish these paragraphs, right? But you get the idea, right? I added the ID reference here. Okay, cool. All right. So really quickly, I'm just going to show you. We're going to use an href just like we've done earlier. Okay. But instead of leaving it blank or referencing like an ID or referencing an external URL, what we're actually going to do is reference a new file. So we'll say different place .html, okay? And what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and load the page. Oh, and I named it badly. So I'll rename the link content. And then if I click this, it's going to say, like, I don't know what you're talking about, right? Because you didn't see me, like, make a file, right? We don't know what this is. So what we can do is simply, we're going to add a new tab. You can also do that by saying new file here. I just did this command here, but to make it clear, I'm just saying new file, okay? And we'll kind of copy some of this like what I call boilerplate. So essentially stuff that's not going to differ between HTML pages. And I'll go ahead and copy this. You can also do this cool thing where you can collapse certain items so that you don't have to see them anymore. You can do this in an editor. So I'm just going to copy this stuff, which I know I'm also going to have. And I'm going to put the head there. It didn't do the indentation the way I wanted, so kind of annoying, but that's okay. I'm going to grab the body because I'll need that for my page. It did it there. Oops. And then I'm going to close the body off, and then I'll close HTML off, and then we should be good to go. Okay. So I'm going to save it now. I just did Control S, and then I'm going to call it what we referenced in that link. And I saved it to the same, it just needs to be next to new home, right? Okay. So we're going to reload this, and all of a sudden it's now complaining, it's just blank, right? That's because we didn't put anything in here. But we can add a quick paragraph. And we can say, welcome to, and we can even change the title. And now it works. And we can go back, and it takes us back to our original page. And then just to prove, things work, we can refresh and we can go there. And now we're at this. We're at this new HTML page. So that's kind of the last thing I wanted to show. And hopefully you can kind of pull all these things together and start organizing content in your own unique way. You can take hopefully what you've learned about CSS and HTML and really start digging in. Yeah, so we're going to kind of move on after this to some other stuff. I didn't get into images, but maybe next time I can briefly preface with that. But for now, what I can do, I'm just going to copy it and I'll put it in there just so you have an example of it. But I won't really talk about, actually, we can put it on this new page. So this is just an example of how to do this. We're just using this img tag. We give it a source, just like we would like a link. And we can link to images on whatever website we want. This alt is just like a subtext. If the image doesn't load, it will display this instead. And then this is like an additional specifier. If you actually know where you're getting the file from, you can like give it, like tell it which version you want, but we don't have to do that. We can just do that. So similar to the way that we referenced our own file, we can do that with images too, right? Like I can reference a file that's on my computer right now. In fact, I have, let's see, any of these. Images, just trying to look for a small file name. Here's an image here. Okay, so we could use this image. I'll get the info for the image so that I can get the name. It looks like it's just a JPG or a JPEG. Or maybe I can rename it. Well, I don't know. I don't have a really good way of getting the name of a file with the extension and everything. But what I can do then is I can say, okay, I can say this downloads. Well, let's go relative to where we are currently. I can say downloads. This might work. Might have. Yep, I messed it up. So it's displaying that alt text, right? Because it couldn't find the image. So let me, another way to do this is to just get the full path. But I don't like doing that. I like to use relative paths, which are these dot dots. So what I'm saying is I'm saying with my current directory, which is here in tutorial, go up 1 to agent-based models, so that would be 1, and then go in there. And then go up 1 again, so that would be dev. So I actually need to go up 1 more. That should get me there.
Wow, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
I remember seeing it like long time ago, and now like you refresh my memory.
Nice, yeah. I'm still doing it wrong. I wish I was.
And can you tell us why it's important to maybe do that, like so nobody knows the files, right? Like the name of the folder.
Yeah, that's part of it.
Okay.
The other reason is that I like using relative path. Well, first of all, let's just solve this problem the way that it should be done, right? So
Okay.
let's go ahead and just take the file itself and actually put it kind of where it belongs, because that might be an even easier solution. But we can put it like at the top level if we want. We can put it in here. So I'll put it in here just to show the relative pathing. But the reason I typically would use a relative path is like if I say, for example, if I say go to root and then go to like users, and then my user I think is just like, I think it's just like this. And then it's like documents, like if I keep drilling down like this, right? Let's say I move this whole project and I decide like I actually want to host it on a website. Like for example, like on GitHub, if I want to host it here, that reference will now break because it's not a meaningful reference to anything on GitHub. So if I try to host it like I have hosted the main project here, where I have some similar links and stuff, if I were to reference like this image, for example, I made this sample page a while back to demonstrate some similar stuff. If I made a reference, or like some of these links actually, if I made them like here, I used your relative path again. If I had referred to instead like my desktop and I forgot about that, then the page would just break, right? Like you'd click this link and it wouldn't go anywhere. It would break. So as long as you keep your project structure the same, using relative paths is more robust, because as long as you keep your folder structure the same, if you just move the whole thing, anywhere you move it, it'll still work. So that's a big advantage to relative paths. And then, yeah, as you mentioned, it's nice because you're not giving away your folder structure or anything. So it can be nice from like a privacy perspective in that way, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so let's try this. It might also be because I'm naming it wrong. I believe it's case sensitive, and I actually can't see the extension of this file, and I don't know how to do it. And I think, yeah, I don't even remember how to, like, I don't know why it's showing here, but it's not showing for this. Maybe it's just not, maybe it just doesn't have an extension. That would be weird, but anyways, so we're gonna go up one from tutorial, out to agent-based models, so that's one, and then we're gonna go out from agent-based models into dev, that's another, and then out from dev, so that's another, and that should get us there. No, it still doesn't work. I think it's because of this file extension. I'm just guessing though at this point, but hopefully you get the idea of what I'm trying to do. Maybe I could just put a file that doesn't suck in here, like this one. But that's the gist. I mean, we're pretty much done with what I wanted to cover. Sorry for going over time. Hopefully it was worthwhile. We're gonna.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of content, so it's like,
yeah,
it's actually really worth it.
That's good to hear. Okay, it works. Is this kind of embarrassing image of cartoon, but yeah, cool. So yeah, I don't know my file extension. I just wasn't getting it right. I will try to figure that out sometime. Yeah, okay, that's it.
All right, thank you.
Beautiful.